Joining us today is Jonathan Kim from ReThink Reviews. He's going to review Freakonomics for us today. And as always, afterwards, fascinating facts. Go.
You can teach a kid just as much at the grocery store as you can in a museum, maybe more. My entire academic life has been devoted to figuring out tricky ways to get at causality, because the world doesn't just offer you up causality. Okay, what you see in the world is correlation. What the world gives you is things are moving together or they aren't. But to be useful, you need to dive down, to be able to strip away what's causing what, what's not causing what. The data that we've looked at suggests that by the time you actually have a kid, most of the choices you make that will make you a good parent, you've already made them.
So if you go to the store and buy 10 parenting books, it's probably not going to really help the kid that much, but the fact that you're the kind of person who, as a parent, cares enough to go buy 10 parenting books, even if you don't read them, that probably means you're a pretty good parent. It's just don't think that the books are going to have a magic effect.
Released in 2005, the book Freakonomics, A Rogue Economist Explores the Hidden Side of Everything, became a New York Times bestseller and sold over 4 million copies worldwide. Written by economist Stephen Levitt and New York Times journalist Stephen Dubner, the main premise of Freakonomics is that economics is, at its root, the study of incentives, and since practically everything has to do with incentives, economic theory can be applied to practically any subject you have data for, from parenting to crime to race. Now there's a documentary of Freakonomics, which takes a novel approach at illustrating some of the book's chapters by allowing some of America's best documentarians to take a crack at them in their own unique styles. In the parenting section, the main question is what effect parents' decisions really have on kids. Morgan Spurlock, director and star of the Oscar-nominated doc Super Size Me, addresses this in A Rashonda by Any Other Name, where he uses fast pacing and his trademark humor to look at baby names, their questionable importance, and whether we live up or down to the names we've been given. The main focus is on the differences between what we consider black names and white ones, where studies have shown that a person with a whiter sounding name like Trevor will get hired faster than someone with a stereotypically black sounding name like Tyrone or Deshaun, even if they have identical resumes. It turns out there are competing incentives at work, a name that expresses cultural identity or a less distinct one that might help job prospects. The animated It's Not Always a Wonderful Life is directed by Eugene Jarecki, who directed the award-winning doc Why We Fight. This piece looks at cause and effect and, more accurately, that correlation is different from causation. Jarecki explores the drop in the crime rate that happened in the 1990s, which most attributed to improved law enforcement strategies, harsher sentencing, and fewer guns on the street. But when Levitt examined the data, he found something more interesting and a lot more controversial, that there was a strong link between the sharp drop in crime rates across the nation and the legalization of abortion 20 years prior. Rachel Grady and Heidi Ewing, co-directors of Jesus Camp, bring their verite style to Can a Ninth Grader Be Bribed to Succeed?, the only story that isn't from the book. In an experiment funded by the University of Chicago, high school students were given $50 for every grade they got above a C, as well as a ride in a tricked-out Hummer limo and the chance to win a raffle for $500. With an incentive like that, along with the dismal prospects high school dropouts face, an improvement in grades would seem natural. But as the film follows two underachieving boys over the course of a school year, we see that strong incentives aren't always enough to dislodge bad habits. Even though the 4 mini-docs have widely varying styles and subjects, with intermediary segments directed by the King of Kong director Seth Gordon, it's hard not to compare them and pick a favorite. And for me, the best piece by a mile is Alex Gibney's Pure Corruption, a film noir-esque investigation into cheating and corruption in the world of sumo wrestling. Gibney, who won an Oscar for his doc Taxi to the Dark Side and lived in Japan for several years, seems to be operating on a totally different level than his fellow documentarians, as a story that starts with statistical proof that sumo wrestlers are fixing matches spirals outward in true noir fashion to involve murder, an indictment of the Japanese police force, parallels with the recent economic crash, and finally, an examination of Japan's ancient value system. In the end, the experiment of using multiple directors turns out to be Freakonomics' biggest problem. While I was captivated by Pure Corruption and Can a Ninth Grader Be Bribed to Succeed, I wasn't that crazy about the other two pieces, which felt more like essays where I was told information instead of stories where I discovered it. And a problem with Freakonomics is that if you aren't digging one of the segments, you're stuck with it for the next 20 minutes, making for an uneven and sometimes frustrating viewing experience. Still, when Freakonomics is good, it's very good, and the concept at its base, that incentives matter and conventional wisdom is often wrong, is a powerful one that might help us figure out why the world is actually the way it is. I'm Jonathan Kim, and this is a ReThink Review.
You know, John, they took a real risk there, the directors did, doing the movie to get, the same movie, although not together, obviously, because you can't help but compare them, right?
Yeah, I think so, and that was exactly what I did.
Right, and so So Alex Gibney comes out on top, huh?
I thought so. I mean, Christy, I read her review of it, and she didn't like that story as much. But I mean, like the Morgan Spurlock one, there's like a lot of graphics. It's real kind of jokey and stuff like that. And I was like, it's not really quite for me. And then the one by the guy who did Why We Fight, his one is like all animated and it's very fast.
Yeah,
Eugene Jarecki. Yeah.
So that's interesting. So it's an interesting concept. But I kind of like the idea of having it be bite-sized, right? Sometimes documentaries that last even an hour and a half, even though it doesn't sound too long, can sometimes, drag in the middle.
Well,
right?
also this book really lends itself to that with such distinct sections that are separate.
Yeah, the categories are so dissimilar from each other that it would handle different styles.
You kind of alluded to that at the end there. Is there an overriding theme that connects all of them?
Well, the guy who directed The King of Kong, so he directed these little like things that go in between them that have a very similar style of them, and those are all interviews with the two guys. Yeah, so that kind of ties them together. But like I said, there's certain movies where it's like if you start watching, you're like, oh, this isn't my type of movie. You wouldn't watch that movie. Whereas this one, there's a part of it that might not be your type of movie. A big chunk of it, and then the next part might be your type. So
right.
Talk about the sumo wrestlers. That's the part you liked best. And
yes, I did.
Because first of all, one thing, this was in the book, the sumo wrestlers. I haven't read the whole book, but the one thing about the book, you can pick it up and read parts of the book, and I know this part of the book, and it's obvious, and it's like you don't need. I don't know. It's like it's fascinating. First of all, just tell us about it. It's fascinating, and it seems kind of obvious to me. We have to look at the statistics to know it's obvious, but once you know the stats, it is obvious what's going on.
Right. So there are these tournaments that happen a few times a year where there are 50, where each sumo wrestler has 15 matches, and if you have 8 or above, then you move up a half a rank, and when that happens, you get more money and
you go to you go to the next tournament. You got to go 8 and 7.
Okay.
Yeah. And so what they found was that if there was ever a match where one wrestler was 8 and 6 and the other one was 7 and 7, the 7 and 7 one, he won 75% of the time. But then if those two wrestlers fought again, the one who was 8 and 6 would win almost all the time. And so by looking at those stats, they're like, well, there must be some cheating here. And the idea is that the 7 and 7 guy has a lot more to lose. If he loses that next match and goes 7 and 8, then he could start dropping down the ladder. Whereas the guy who's 8 and 6, he can go 8 and 7, and he'll still move up.
I mean, it's a little like resting your starters in the 16th game of the season. You've already qualified for the playoffs, so there's some of that too. But then there's this, But then the other parts that are sort of theoretical is the idea that it's sort of this close-knit community where they're like respecting each other, right?
Yeah. Okay. But how does that relate to the murder?
Well, yeah. Well, what happens is there are these two guys who sort of like ran these sumo schools or kind of like stables, and they became whistleblowers, and they started writing these articles saying this match fixing is happening, and they were about to give a press conference. And 2 weeks before that, they both died on the same day in the same hospital of the same mysterious respiratory illness. And
it sounds like a wild coincidence. Yeah.
Yeah, and
I'm sure it happened just like that.
Right, and the police didn't investigate it. And I mean, that's how this sumo story, how it gets bigger and bigger and bigger because it becomes this thing about how the police, they have like a 96% success rate in terms of like convicting crimes. But this one cop quit the force because he said, the thing is they're not investigating all the crimes because they only do the ones that they think they can solve. And so they're just not going to investigate certain ones. And also like policemen are judged by by their success rate, not how, so it's like if they open a case that they can't solve, it looks bad for them. So they just won't open the case.
The two overriding things I get from it is that, and you alluded to it at the end of your review, is things are not as they seem, right? and be really careful with what incentives you give people.
Right.
Because they will twist things to match just those incentives. So if you give the incentives to the Japanese cops, hey, I want you to have a high closure rate, you've got to think, oh, they're not going to take the cases.
Exactly.
Right? And you got to think of that, what really people would call unintended consequence, but it's at this point it should be obvious.
But it's true here too.
Right.
I mean, to an enormous extent, and we saw it on The Wire, and we know it to
be
true.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah,
no
but
question.
I mean, but you move, you pawn murders off on, nobody wants 13 unsolved murders in their in their precinct. Nobody wants that on their books because it matters. That's how, there's money involved in that. There's staff, there's crap, there's keeping your job, and there's a whole whole rash of crap that comes down from City Hall and from the Commissioner's office, and out here too, moving stuff into the cold case unit to keep it off the books of your precinct in LA. I mean, it looks bad.
Yeah, and also like with schools, the idea of like kind of forcing out low-achieving kids, like getting them to drop out of school,
Sure,
so
right.
that way your scores go up in your school.
Right, because they're concerned about the scores and not the dropout rate.
Right. So if I was in charge of the cops or the schools in those cases, I'd throw that stuff out, right? And I'd say, no, here's what we're going to do now, right? And then, but I would think, okay, when I set up the new set of structure, that's going to have its own set of problems.
Right, you got to be willing to. So we're going to come back in 18 months, and we're going to see what new monstrous problem I've created by doing
Right.
this.
Now, the reason that people like me don't run those schools and don't run those districts is because
You're Muslim.
Well, that too. That's a huge part of it, right? But the other part of it is that if you stick your neck out like that, you're so much more likely to be fired. Now, I don't care if I'm fired, but they obviously, almost everybody else does care if they're fired. So that's the issue.
And
so
you see, in the documentary Waiting for Superman, the Davis Guggenheim documentary, you see what happened in Washington, D.C. I don't know all the details. I know that Michelle Rhee in Washington, D.C. was portrayed very favorably there, the superintendent of the D.C. schools. And she was very much stuck her neck out. Came in, totally new way of thinking, never been a superintendent before, and took on the teachers union and was sort of rash and brash across the board and irritated everyone and stuck her neck out. And then her protector, the current mayor, Adrian Fenty, just lost the primary, the Democratic primary, and that's essentially the election in D.C. And she's going to lose her job.
And that's, welcome to America. Welcome to the whole world. That's how it works. Okay, now, but we have limited time here. I really want to mention some of the other things here. First, the abortion one on the cause and effect of the crime. Flesh that out a little bit for me.
Right. So basically, like around the 1990s, the crime rate starts plummeting. And people are trying to figure out, well, why did this happen? Is it, new law enforcement strategies, putting more people in jail? Is it that the crack market is changing? And when Levitt kind of looked at all this data, he thought that those reasons only accounted for about 50% of the crime rate drop. But then he looked back and he said, Roe versus Wade is passed in 1973. And generally the prime sort of crime years for young people are, like 17 to 22. And so it coincided right with that. When those kids would have been at that crime age, they just weren't there. And that usually people who are getting abortions are going to be people who are single parents, maybe not that much money, and those are big indicators of whether you become a criminal or not. If you're raised in a family with a single parent where you don't have a lot of money and you don't have a lot of education.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I don't know if I buy it. What do you guys think? Do you buy that?
I read that part, and then something came up, and I had to go. So I didn't finish it, but because it was brought to my attention as something fascinating. Because when I was in journalism school at Columbia, but when I was in J school, we, the FBI's stats when I was in there in the early '90s, and we talked about those crime stats, and the FBI and people, applauding the reduction in crime and attributing it to one president or one policy, and the FBI is like, no, it's just age. It's literally the number of people between 15 and 22. That's it. There are fewer of them, crime goes down.
Right.
There are more of them, crime goes up. And this is part of that, is that Levitt was essentially saying, and here's why there are fewer of them. The FBI was arguing that it always goes like this. So in a sense, he's got an answer for that. I don't know. Because
also the second answer he gives is that before Roe versus Wade was happened, there were 3 states that already had abortion was legal already. In those states, the crime rate, it was legal 3 years before Roe versus Wade was passed, and their crime rate went down 3 years earlier than those other states.
Oh, it's okay then. I really was not convinced, partly because I know, for example, New York, the crime rate dropped more significantly than other places. So obviously there's a difference between localities, and it's not just explained by nationwide abortion stats. On the other hand, those 3 states, that's an enormously relevant fact.
Maybe, or maybe not. I haven't read it. I didn't finish reading it, but I know from understanding baseball stats and sabermetrics, as limited as that makes me an expert here, There's no way there aren't a billion other factors, and maybe that is. But deciding,
of
yeah,
course
I
I
mean,
agree.
no, I
But
mean,
we all agree with that.
no. But I mean, a billion other factors that might be the primary cause, and just because I don't know what they looked at, and it's fascinating, and a friend of mine who's read it who swears by that, but I don't know. And but the 3 other states that the declining 3 years earlier, that by itself meaningless.
Well,
It's as if you didn't hear my gavel.
Did you? I didn't know you gavelled.
Yeah, all right. Okay.
I didn't.
So
but
Wait a
he
minute.
takes
I just put the earpiece in. I'm sorry. Yeah,
Well,
I didn't
when-
realize you gavelled it. Never mind.
One other part of that is that when Roe versus Wade was passed, there were states where abortion was legal, but it wasn't easily available. But there were some states where they made it more easily available. In the easily available states, the crime rate dropped 30% more.
But there are other things that.
Oh,
happened.
yeah,
That's
exactly.
all I'm saying.
Yes, there
in
are.
those states at that time.
Yes.
No, that's it.
Once again, gavel. Okay. All right, and then finally, the names, of course, are enormously fascinating. So there's 2 different things. One is the expectations that come along with names, and another is black and white names. The difference it makes.
Yeah, well, I mean, one example that's given is this woman, a woman had a baby, and she loved Tempest Bledsoe from The Cosby Show. So she wanted to name her that, but she didn't know how it was spelled, and so she named the kid Temptress. And Temptress ended up getting in a lot of trouble and being very promiscuous. And the question was she living up to her name, or was it something else? But if you look at it, okay, who's going to name their kid Temptress, not know what that word means? Was that the woman was a single mother, was in a poor neighborhood? That's a bigger indicator. But
Obviously.
But at the same time, a study was done that said they had identical resumes, and the person was named Tyrone, and the other person was named Greg. And the person who was named Greg got 33% more interviews, and that they would have been able to find a job 5 weeks earlier than Tyrone, despite having identical resumes.
What, are you just going to hire Tyrone?
That's crazy.
It's crazy.
But luckily, this study was done in 1965, right?
No, it was pretty recent, I believe.
No, remember we did this. We
Yeah,
did this
it
5
was-
years ago, and
yeah.
it's incredibly compelling. And it was more the study that we read, and I assume maybe it's the same study. It was more than Greg and Tyrone. It was women. It was Susan and LaQuisha, and the resumes
definitely.
were identical. And frequently they enhanced, I believe, the traditionally black name resume, made it even a little better, and still the Susan resume got more responses, more likely to get a call, more likely to find the job.
Yes,
quicker.
that's
It's totally compelling, and that's a limited.
Right.
That's a.
That study was done, I believe, like Ben said, around 2005. So, and then there was just a study out the other day about if you put in an eBay ad or Craigslist ad, a white hand holding an iPad versus a black hand holding an iPad, and the ones that sold better were the ones in the white hand. Okay. And there was like 8 other factors involved, like they were less likely to trust that they would ship it if it was a black hand, etc. So the idea that, racism, we're past it. Come on, Obama's the president. It's crazy talk.
Because I was thinking it might have been like, well, I have to go into a black neighborhood to pick up that iPod? Like, is that going to be dangerous? So maybe I'd rather not do that. And
So all those, there was like 8 different factors, or 8 different ways that they showed the discrimination, and it's fascinating. And I'm sure those people who made those decisions, they don't view themselves as racist.
Sure.
And they didn't even recognize it. I mean, and that's part of the problem, right? So, but finally, what's our conclusion on me naming my son Prometheus? Is that disastrous based on this movie, or is it a good thing?
What they're saying is that it matters more like who the parents are. The fact that you probably know who Prometheus is, right? Which means you'd probably be educated to a certain degree.
Right.
And in the movie, they talk about this guy who he had 2 sons, and he named one winner and one loser. And
that's awesome.
Loser ended up being really successful. He went to college and became like a detective and everything, and winner ended up in jail.
And the reason
I don't believe that story. And I don't believe one part of that story. I don't believe the guy named his kid Winner and Loser. I don't believe Loser is a cop. I don't believe Winner went to jail. I don't believe that parent.
Apparently, Loser goes by Lou.
Yeah.
Okay. No, but that's crazy not to believe it. Do you think they all made the whole thing up?
Yes.
Okay, all right. And by the way, Loser had a great career because he just wouldn't take the cases that he didn't think were going to close.
Yeah, he took one case, he solved it with 100 witnesses. You know, yeah, he's a genius detective.
And then he went to his dad and he's like, loser? What now?
Yeah, who's the loser
Well,
now?
yeah, Loser had something to prove, so he's going to work harder. So.
Right.
By the way, I saw that you didn't see the movie, did you?
No.
Because there's a whole section on Prometheus.
Yeah.
And what they have determined is that there is a 100% chance that a baby named Prometheus will grow up to be gay.
What am I going to do with this guy? What am I going to do with this guy? All right, listen, Rethink Reviews is on rethinkreviews.net, Huffington Post, YouTube. Ignore this guy. Okay? Loser exists, and that thing does not.
I don't know.
Okay.